The authorities were, of course, very appreciative of the work of the sisters. As a result, a convent and a chapel were built for them at Marine Bay on the western side of the island. The Hansenian settlement was situated at Sanders Bay on the eastern side.
The sisters wanted to be with their patients, that is on the eastern part of the island. You know, the island has the shape of a horseshoe. So the settlement was on the eastern part, and the sisters wanted to be with the patients. But the authorities said no, because in case of trouble, we want you to be apart.
There was no road at the time, and the sisters had to travel by boat to get to and from the settlement.
The authorities never foresee that a boat was needed. So kind fishermen say, all right, sisters, we will transport you. And so they were transporting the sisters to and fro in their boats. And they had to do it 4 times a day, morning, noon, and evening.
Travel by sea in a small boat was not without some danger.
All the sisters could not be seated in the boat. So one of them was standing, Sister Marie Stanislas, and it was midday, and she had her umbrella above her head. Suddenly there was a jerk in the boat, and she fell overboard, holding her umbrella. So the 2 fishermen had to jump into the sea, and rescue the poor sister. She was from Poland, this sister, Sister Marie Stanislas.
In researching material for her book, Called to Serve, Sister Marie-Thérèse discovered that some sisters had died on the island and were buried there. In 1986, she asked for and received help from the Coast Guard in locating the graves of the sisters.
This is a big story. In the 1980s, our provincial superior asked me to write the history of the Dominican sisters in Trinidad. And the reason was, when facts are not consigned to writing, legends abound. So I undertook this, but I had to do a lot of research. And the most difficult part was Chacachacari, because it's an island. So I must say I am most grateful to some members of the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, because they helped me very much to find the graves, particularly the late Commodore Mervyn William. They found the grave, they restored the cemetery, and he asked me to come with him, and I identified the graves, so that was the start.
The local Catholic community has, of course, always been aware of the contribution of the Dominican sisters. In a simple ceremony at the site of the graves, the late Archbishop Anthony Pantin said prayers on the occasion of the renovation of the cemetery. Mother Rose Weber was one of the sisters who were buried at Chacachacari. She died of the disease, but surprisingly, she never nursed patients.
It is very difficult to understand, because one was from Paris, Mother Rose de Sainte Marie, and the other one was a local, and none of the two was really with the patients, neither at Cocorit nor Chacachacari. So, very mysterious how they got the disease. But Sister Rose was admitted first of all at Cocorit, and then she followed the patients to Chacachacari. And in Chacachacari, she was put in a house by herself, and the patients loved her and admired her, because she was one of them. And they called this little house La Santa Casa, because they had such love for this mother. And she died a very saintly death in 1937. And she was buried in the cemetery of the patients. They didn't bring her to the cemetery of the sisters in Marine Bay. They said no, she has to stay on the side of the patients.
By 1945, many of the older Dominican sisters had passed on, and replacements were needed. but more sisters could not come from France due to the Second World War. As a result, Archbishop Finbar Ryan asked the Sisters of Mercy, nuns from Boston, USA, to come to assist the Dominican sisters. They came in 1945. This was their convent on the island. But that was probably a sign of things to come. While the Dominican sisters performed their duties at Shakashakari out of love and devotion, it was gradually being felt by the government that what was needed there were medically qualified staff and more official control. Perceiving this, the sisters voluntarily left the settlement in 1950 after having nursed lepers for 82 years. In 1984, the settlement was eventually closed down. It was no longer needed as cures for Hansen's disease had been discovered. In the course of their many years of dedicated service, several of the Dominican sisters were recipient of distinguished awards bestowed on them by the governments of France, Britain, and Trinidad and Tobago. In the words of the late Archbishop of Trinidad and Tobago, Anthony Pantin, the history of the Dominican sisters in Trinidad is full of drama. It is a real-life story of truly heroic women who, whatever their human limitations might have been, came to give their lives in the service of the people of Trinidad in the first place, and whose successors continue to serve the independent country of Trinidad and Tobago.